The quiet dog that wolves watch, then leave. Most people think wolves leave because they're afraid. They imagine a loud guardian dog exploding into action, barking, charging, snapping, forcing predators into retreat. But that's not what actually makes wolves leave, and it's definitely not what keeps goats safe. The truth is quieter than that. The real story isn't about the wolves, it's about the goats. Because if you want to understand why predators turn around, you don't start by watching the forest, you start by watching the herd. Goats are prey animals. They live their lives measuring pressure. They feel tension in the air before humans notice anything. They detect shifts in energy long before there's visible movement. They read posture, breathe, and stillness with frightening accuracy. And when something is wrong, they change. Their chewing slows, their heads lift, their ears angle toward the tree line, their bodies tighten. But when the right dog is present, something different happens. The goats glance towards the woods. Then they glance toward the dog. And then they keep grazing. This is the moment everything changes. Because predators don't just read dogs, they read herds. Wolves are observers before they are attackers. They calculate. They measure distance. They look for separation. They look for confusion. They look for fear. They want one goat drifting too far, one goat hesitating, one goat panicking. They don't want structure. And a herd that refuses to panic is a herd that feels protected. The quiet dog understands this. He doesn't rush forward. He doesn't explode into noise. He doesn't chase shadows. He stands, chest forward, head level, weight balanced, still. But not passive. There's a difference. He isn't reacting to the wolves. He's absorbing them. And goats feel that immediately. Goats don't follow noise. They follow stability. If a dog is frantic, goats become frantic. If a dog is unsure, goats spread. If a dog is overreacting, goats scatter. But when a dog is grounded, the herd compresses. They drift behind him. They form tighter lines. They create a natural wall. They don't even realize they're doing it because it's instinct. The quiet dog becomes the center of gravity, and goats move toward gravity. This is the moment wolves begin to hesitate, because wolves don't want to fight. They want an open opportunity. They want a gap in the herd. They want confusion. They want a mistake. But when the goats move closer to the dog instead of away from him, there is no mistake. When goats lower their heads and continue grazing despite tension, there is no fear. And fear is what predators feed on. Not courage, not noise, not aggression. Fear. A herd that trusts its guardian is a herd that removes fear from the equation. That changes everything. Here's something most people miss. Guardian dogs don't force goats to gather. Goats choose which dog feels safe. If there are multiple guardian dogs in a pasture, you'll see it clearly during moments of tension. The herd will drift toward one. Not necessarily the biggest, not the loudest, not the youngest, the calmest. Because goats measure emotional gravity. The quiet dog feels heavy, grounded, unshakable. The loud dog feels unstable, unpredictable, and instability creates doubt. Wolves sense the same thing goats do. They read posture, they read eye contact, they read breathing. They read how the herd responds. If goats scatter wildly when the dog reacts, wolves notice. If goats ignore the forest and continue grazing behind the dog, wolves notice that too. And when goats begin turning their backs to the woods, that's the signal, that's the shift. When prey animals feel safe enough to turn their backs on potential danger, it means something powerful is happening. They're not preparing to flee. They're not bracing for impact. They are relaxed. Predators do not like relaxed prey under protection, because relaxed prey under protection means the guardian has already proven himself. Wolves don't want to challenge structure. Structure is expensive. Structure means coordination. Structure means resistance. Structure means risk. And wolves survive by minimizing risk. The quiet dog doesn't win by intimidating wolves. He wins by eliminating opportunity. He removes the possibility of separation. He removes the possibility of panic. He removes the possibility of easy access. He doesn't need to bark. He doesn't need to charge. He simply holds space. And goats understand space better than humans do. They feel when space is controlled. They feel when distance is protected. They feel when pressure is being absorbed. The quiet dog becomes a wall without moving, and goats stack behind walls. This is why wolves often stand at the edge of a pasture and just watch. They're waiting for instability. They're waiting for chaos. They're waiting for one goat to misread the moment. But when the herd remains calm, when they keep grazing, when they casually reposition behind the dog, the wolves begin recalculating. And when recalculation produces no advantage, they leave. Not dramatically, not in fear, just logically, because it's not worth it. That's the power of stillness. It looks unimpressive to humans, but to goats, it feels like safety. And to wolves, it feels like wasted effort. Most people focus on aggression when they think about protection, but real protection is about positioning. It's about emotional control. It's about stability. It's about eliminating mistakes before they happen. The quiet dog doesn't need to chase wolves away. He makes the pasture so structurally sound that wolves decide not to enter, and the goats are the proof. If you want to know whether your guardian dog is truly effective, don't look at how loud he is. Watch the herd. If the goats scatter during tension, something is wrong. If the goats compress behind him, something is right. If the goats turn their backs to the forest and keep chewing, the wolves have already lost. Because protection isn't about fighting. It's about preventing the fight from ever needing to happen. The quiet dog that wolves watch and then leave isn't winning with the aggression. He's winning with gravity. He becomes the emotional anchor in a field full of prey. And goats don't gather behind force. They gather behind certainty. When the herd trusts the dog enough to stay calm during danger, that trust becomes a visible barrier. Wolves see it, they feel it, they calculate it, and they turn around. Not because they were chased, but because there was nothing to exploit. In the end, the quiet dog doesn't move. The goats don't run, and the wolves decide it wasn't worth it. That's not dramatic, but it's powerful. And in the wild, power is often quiet. Now let's talk about the opposite, because understanding protection means understanding what failure looks like. Most people think predators win because they're stronger. They think wolves succeed because they overpower livestock. But strength isn't usually the deciding factor. Instability is. When goats don't feel safe, they move differently. It starts small. A head snaps up, ears lock forward, chewing stops. But instead of drifting calmly behind the guardian, they spread. They create space, and space is opportunity. When goats feel unsure about their dog, they don't gather behind him. They hesitate. They hover. They mill. They scatter just enough to create gaps. To a human eye, it may look normal. To a wolf, it looks like possibility. Because predators don't attack strength. They attack disorder. Now look at the dog in this scenario. He might be loud. He might bark at every shadow. He might pace constantly. He might charge the fence line over and over again. To a human, that looks like effort. It looks protective. It feels reassuring. But goats don't interpret it that way. Goats interpret frantic movement as instability. They don't feel anchored, they feel tension. And tension spreads through a herd like electricity. One goat shifts, another follows. Instead of compression, you get fragmentation. Instead of gravity, you get drift. Instead of a wall, you get cracks. Wolves notice cracks. They notice when goats begin separating into smaller clusters, subcategories, and groups. They notice when young goats stand slightly apart. They notice when a loud dog is reacting emotionally instead of strategically. The loud dog thinks he's pushing predators back, but what he's really doing is advertising uncertainty. Wolves are patient. They don't need the first opportunity. They just need the right one. And when goats don't trust the guardian completely, that right moment eventually appears. Here's something most people miss. Goats don't just move away from predators. They move away from pressure. If the dog is too intense, too unpredictable, too reactive, the goats begin avoiding him. They drift around him instead of behind him. They spread out rather than compress. And that tiny shift is everything. Because when goats move around the dog instead of behind him, they expose their sides. They create lanes. They create entry points. They create angles. Wolves don't need chaos. They need angles. The quiet dog closes angles without effort. The unstable dog creates them without realizing it. Inexperienced guardian dogs often mistake noise for authority. They bark constantly. They rush forward at every movement. They escalate tension immediately. But escalation only works if it's rare. If everything is treated like a crisis, nothing feels controlled. You may have heard this story in The Boy Who Cried Wolf, where every time he cried, people would come, and then eventually they would adjust because they realized there was no wolf. Goats are masters at reading control. If the dog can't regulate himself, the herd won't regulate either. And when goats begin scanning the tree line repeatedly instead of grazing, that's when wolves lean in. Because goats that scan are goats that expect something. Goats that expect something are goats that anticipate flight. And flight is when mistakes happen. If you enjoyed this video or if you learned something new, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching.